Transparency Act. So maybe just first introductions. My name is Adam Sweet. I'm a principal in our national tax office. I sit in Spokane and do a bunch of different things with Eide Bailly, but I've also been following this new legislation that comes into effect next year for the firm, kind of mostly, as we'll discuss, in an advisory role, because Eide Bailly is not going to be directly involved with it, but just trying to monitor this new law and how it's going to impact clients.
My name is Devin Hecht. I'm a principal in the National Tax Office as well. I'm based in Billings, Montana, and I work in our Wealth Transition Services Group, which covers matters like estate planning and trust planning and compliance work, and work throughout the firm on those type of matters, helping clients with anything with estate planning.
This is Beatrice Skyberg. I'm also with Eide Bailly's National Tax Office and specifically with International Tax Department. I'm physically located in beautiful and wonderful South Dakota.
So talking Corporate Transparency Act, from the federal government perspective, the issue is there's no central repository where if someone in DC, right, if the FBI or the Department of Justice says there's money coming in from overseas, we think that it's coming from an illicit source. We think that it's up to no good. It's actually very difficult for the federal government to figure out, hey, if it's in South Dakota or if it's a Delaware LLC, for instance, it's not necessarily where the federal government can just press a button and automatically figure out who owns the entity, where the money came from, who set up the entity, who's the point of contact here in the United States for that entity. So that's really the impetus for the Corporate Transparency Act, which is what we're going to be talking about today. It was enacted in January 1st of 21. We were following it back then. It becomes effective for next year, so hence the urgency now and hence why we're talking about it. But its goal really is to, and I put it in quotes there, but is to establish kind of a uniform method so that no matter what state that you form the entity, there's uniform reporting that the federal government can track. So that no matter if you form your LLC in Delaware or South Dakota or Wyoming or my state, Washington State, there's certain information, no matter where you go, that you're going to have to disclose. And that will be stored in some type of central system. And then it should hopefully help our federal government then track issues and police issues. And that's why I put that note there that it's part of a larger, quote unquote, Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, the Corporate Transparency Act. The CTA is very broad-based. So it affects every basically company. When I say company, basically entity in the United States. Now, some entities are exempt, which we'll cover in a bit, but it's a blanket law that it's not targeted necessarily at just certain entities. It's basically targeted at all entities. And the goal is that basically every entity that is set up, no matter what state, that the U.S., I think the federal authorities will be able to track truly who really owns that entity, who beneficially owns that entity. Importantly for Eide Bailly and most accounting firms, you'll note here that this does not involve the Internal Revenue Service, and this is not part of the Internal Revenue Code, and it doesn't involve tax compliance. So these various disclosures that will have to be made starting next year, they will not be on the tax return. Not a tax return, there won't be any federal tax form that was filed, so forth. I compare that to, in B, we'll talk about this at the end, but we have other areas like FATCA, which is Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, I think. That's where you have to check on your tax return whether you have a foreign bank account. That was specifically passed by Congress for the IRS to administer. So Eide Bailly is involved with that, just because when we file a tax return every year, we have to check the box whether there's foreign accounts or not and do the various compliance issues. Not the case with the CTA, that there's nothing here that would directly involve a CPA firm. Then I'd also say, like most legislation, and certainly in the tax world, the legislation is the easy part. Congress passes a law, that's the easy part. The hard part is all the various rules and regulations that have to come out after that. Explanatory text, forms, proposed regulations, final regulations. And so those are still coming out. This is just a snippet here of the various rules that have both been proposed and finalized for the CTA. Towards the end, we're going to talk about there's still ongoing updates to this, that there's actually, we thought we had the final rules, but it turns out that there's probably one additional rule that will come out by the end of this year. Important because starting January 1st of next year, everyone's going to be subject to these rules.